I'm going to. I was really impressed. I just tried it by happenstance a few days ago, and I think maybe for our first meeting, and it produced such a good summary. Very
Really?
light edits, right? And for people who can't be here, that's very useful.
Mm-hmm.
So
Did you
I
use it for
talked
the
with,
one that you and I that we did, the three of us? Was
yeah,
that an eight? That
yeah,
was incredible.
yeah, yeah. The robots are taking over. Um, Too bad it couldn't win an election. Let's keep going. Um,
You couldn't help yourself.
couldn't help myself. Um, let's begin with the lineage supplication, since this is a Vajrayana discussion, and then we'll carry on. So if you have I'm going to do the Kagyu one. If you have another one you want to do, please go ahead. And if you know this, well, why don't we? It's probably easier if just one of us leads it rather than so looks we look good. Great Vajradhara Tilo Naro Marpa Mila, Lord of Dharma Gampopa, knower of the three times omniscient Karmapa, holders of the four great and eight lesser lineages, Drikung Taklung Salpa, these Strukpa and so on, masters of the profound path of Mahamudra, incomparable protectors of beings, the Takpo Kagyu, I Kagyu Gurus, I hold your lineage, grant your blessing so that I will so that I will remember the rest of the chant. Robert, help me out.
Revulsion is the foot of meditation, as is taught the guru. Sorry,
To this meditation.
to this meditator who is not attached to food and wealth, who cuts it. I do this like blessing so that I have no desire for honor and gain. You want to continue?
Go ahead.
Um,
Devotion.
Devotion is the head of meditation, as is taught to the guru opens the gate to the treasury of oral instructions to this medit. Continually supplicates and grant your blessing so that genuine devotion is born in me. Awareness is the body of meditation, as is taught whatever arises is fresh the essence of realization. To this meditator who rests simply without altering it, grant your blessing so that my meditation is free from conception. Uh, Awareness is, would I do that one? The essence of thoughts is Dharmakaya, as is taught nothing whatever, but everything arises from it. To this meditator who arises in unceasing blessing so that I realize the inseparability of samsara and nirvana through all my births. May I not be separated from the perfect guru and so enjoy the splendor of Dharma, perfecting the virtues. As in Bhumi, may I speedily attain the state of Vajradhara.
Thank you, Robert. In the invaluable words of, I'm not sure which one it was. I'm going to give credit to John Lennon, the Bodhisattva John Lennon. I get by with a little help from my friends. So as we get older, and it's like, oh, what's the next line there? Um, One of the lovely things about that, I want to just go right at this, and my intention for today is to, offer a few short Dharma remarks, um, talk about Yidam practice and the subtle body again, like pick up where we were last time. And then towards the second half of this, there's a short Amitabha practice that I would like to share. And I think I can give a lung for. And I'm not even sure a lung is necessary, but we'll do it formally. So that's the reading transmission of the practice, which would authorize you to do the practice. Um, I'm drawing on my authorization from Kempo Sultram Rinpoche, who, when I asked him a couple of questions when I was at Gampo Abbey, he said, "You're a Lama, do it. Just teach." Right? So I was like, okay, thank you, Rinpoche. Um, so In the Kagyu lineage supplication, among many other things, it's a great description of the path. And I'm trying to remember which Kagyu Siddha wrote that, but whoever it was, he spent like 18 years on an island with one companion as his attendant and minimal supplies. And when he came out of his 18-year retreat, they asked him, "What did you get? Like, what do you understand?" And that chant is his expression of his understanding. Um, so it has the whole path. And that stanza, the essence of thoughts is Dharmakaya as is taught. No thing whatsoever, but everything arises from it. To this meditator who arises in unceasing play, right? Grant your blessing so that I realize the inseparability of samsara and nirvana. So essential to the view, and I almost always start when I think about this stuff with start with the view. Like, what is the understanding, or in meditation and action, we call it the intention? What are we actually trying to accomplish? And in terms of all Vajrayana practice, we are trying to accomplish a recognition of the true nature, the nature of mind, the nature of awareness, the nature of reality. Like, lots of ways to talk about it, um, but of the true nature. And if we were talking about it through the lens of, how is it to be aware, or how is it to have a mind, thoughts have no permanent, meaningful separateness. We use the word existence in English, forgetting, most of us, that it's a Latin word that means to stand out from the field, to be separated from. X is out, and histe is actually a form of the Latin verb to throw, to stand, to put. Right? So something that stands out. Um, if we were thinking about it in terms of psychology, it's a gestalt. It's something that stands out from the field of existence. And so we have this misperception that we stand out from the field of existence as being separate. We experience it that way, but we're actually part of the field. We are like a droplet in the wave of the ocean moving forward. And our minds are like that also. There is an experience of awareness that temporarily, is notable, stands out, but it is not a permanent standout thing. So it's empty of standoutness, or empty of permanence, or empty of being absolute or independent, or there's lots of philosophical ways of saying real in the way we normally mean it. And yet it's vividly there. You're watching this, listening to this, you're having a thought, you're having perceptions. That's very vivid. It feels like you're there and this is happening, right? And so getting that, the essence of thoughts is Dharmakaya. That's what Dharmakaya is. It's the vast space of openness in which that vivid appearance happens. Right? No thing, that's the not stand out, whatsoever. But everything arises from it. To this meditator who arises in unceasing play, like it's constantly, the wave keeps forming and then collapsing and then forming and collapsing. And that's the nature of life, right? So we're not in opposition to that. And as we practice, we're trying to realize, oh, that's my experience of being awake. It's very vivid. There's no real me and no real awake thing to hold on to. And yet, awaking happens. And as Robert and maybe Margaret will know, and maybe Bonnie, I'm in love with gerunds. The taking the ing at the end of a noun and using it to point at, this is an experience, not a thing. So awaking is the constant play of awareness, and that's the view. Um, Sometimes that, very vividness is called luminosity, and the no thing whatsoever is called emptiness or shunyata. So it's emptiness, appearance, or like, it gets very philosophical and can get sort of categorically confusing, but that's what we're trying to point at. And that's what we're going to work with, both in terms of Vajrayana practice. All Vajrayana practice works with that, and with Phowa in particular, because the ultimate aim in Phowa, which I think we'll get to next time, um, the actual practice, is you imagine your consciousness very vividly with this symbolic representation in your imagination or your visualization, and then you are trying to move that uh, towards enlightenment, visualized as a Buddha or a Buddha field, or right. That's the practice. Right? So helpful to just start with. We're working with consciousness. Consciousness is not a thing; it's an experiencing. So we are consciousnessing. Back to my love of the gerunds, like we're consciousnessing. Right? We are being conscious, and we're we're using the vivid openness of that to connect with what the experience of being awake is. So I'm going to pause because that was a lot, and you might have a thought or a question you'd like to ask before I carry forward.
Of course I do.
All right.
Um, Also, in the chant was something that you didn't mention, something about conception, no conception, or something like that. I don't know if you can remember exactly what it was. The
Help me out. Somebody
Yeah,
help me out with the line.
I'm hoping Robert is gonna
Robert or
know.
Bonnie might have it in front. I have it somewhere here. Um,
Grant your blessing so that my mind is free from conception.
Yeah,
oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
it.
yeah.
That was it.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to say anything about that. I always think
Hmm.
about conceptuality because uh, there are in Atisha's Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment,
Hmm.
he mentions over and over how this worldly concern, the basis is conceptuality, and the elimination of conceptuality is the highest state of nirvana. But he goes on about conceptuality and to be able to meditate without conceptuality. And then he says, non-conceptually contemplate this teaching. And I think about conceptuality a lot as the base. In other words, in order to be an embodied being and survive, we need certain things, including food, shelter, and stuff like that. So, on some level, we must be able to have conceptuality. But it seems like they're saying that conceptuality is the basis upon which all of this stuff is, all of these troubling things are built. And if we could rest in non conceptuality, uh, that's a goal on some level. So I don't know if you have anything to say
So
about.
I do, and I think I'm going to be very Vajrayana. I'm only going to say that once. Like the answers will be very direct, and we get to have a back and forth. So please, if there's room for a back and forth, that would be great. I think what's being pointed at, probably the English translation stumbles. I don't know exactly what word's being pointed at, but I can tell you what I understand. Uh, the problem isn't with having thoughts. The problem is regarding the thoughts as real. So asking that your meditation is free from conception is not saying I want to have no thoughts, which is the mistake a lot of people make when they begin to meditate. That's called a coma or death or no brain activity, right? You're right. You're an embodied being, you're going to have thoughts. Recognizing them is just part of the flow of experience. They come and they go. They have different reality, like truth value of how much they represent reality, how much they're habitual. If you can recognize it's like a movie playing or a river flowing, then you're not stuck in the conceptuality of it. But what's being pointed to as conceptual is, oh, I have a thought. I was remembering something earlier this morning from when I was much younger. It was pleasant. I can't remember what it was, but I'm going to say my favorite example of this is a red tricycle I had when I was 5. And I remember the red. Now I'm fixated on that. And I can't get the tricycle out of my mind. And I'm just holding on to it. And so a lot of us, we have a thought like, well, meditation is, or awake is, and then it's some box. Like, I have a friend who thinks awake is always calm. Well, not when the house is on fire. Some panic is appropriate. I'll calmly stroll over to the fire extinguisher. No, get the extinguisher, yell fire. Like there's an appropriate, right? Or it's always like, no, sometimes it's appropriate to be calm. So that's like not being stuck in the idea. So that's my appreciation of what's being pointed at. So to this meditator, grant your blessing so that my meditation is free from conception, is asking that flow of thoughts that we talk about in either meditation is freedom, entering the stream, uh, community refuge. It's just the flow. It's the vivid expression. Like that's expressing the alive quality, and I'm just letting it flow. I'm not stuck. Back to you, Jeff. What do you think?
I'm going to have to give that some conceptual thought. um, the it's I think I'm taking it too literally because I've asked people in the past, like teachers, lamas, Rinpoches and whatever, and I've never really been satisfied with the answer. And I always, and this makes sense. What you're saying is not that there are no conceptions, because what's left if there's no
Right,
conceptions on some
right.
level, that that's what on some level awareness is. I don't know, so I'm going to have to give this some thought, but it's very
Yeah,
helpful because it's always troubled me. If you read those, it's not a long thing. He almost says like the elimination of conceptuality is the highest state of nirvana, but among other things. And then he says, non-conceptually meditate on this. And I'm like, okay, how can you non-conceptually meditate on something, or whatever?
right.
And, so
So
I was like,
I think it would be very useful to ask, somebody who knew what that was in either Tibetan or Sanskrit, what's the word?
I was
And
thinking of that.
then there's a follow-up question. Give me another translation than conceptual.
Mhm.
Like give me another word for that. And then you'll probably begin to zero in. Margaret, you have your
Well,
hand?
I Googled while we were talking
Oh
because
no. Lama,
because Jeff
Lama.
loves to go to this question, and I had the same thought as you, like what word are we talking about here? Like
Mhm.
what's the Tibetan or the Sanskrit? Um and so far I haven't found the Tibetan, but I found the next English translation of it, Jeff, which is here's the question: what's the highest teaching of the path? Atisha replies, the highest skill is the realization of egolessness. The highest nobility is, and then he keeps going. But conceptuality in this particular one is translated as egolessness.
Mhm.
Right.
Um, and that's, I think, the difficulty with English.
Yeah.
And so, being somebody who, my original training as a therapist is in body work and different body disciplines and looking at sensation and understanding how we express ourselves through the body. Um, like at some point, I figured out we have a whole conceptual language, vocabulary, whatever you want to say, uh, about our physical experience that doesn't have words. It has gesture and movement, and every dancer knows this.
Mhm.
And that's as conceptual. It frames our views of the world, it frames our prejudices and biases and all of that as much as any words do, as
Right.
much as any thoughts do. I'm sure that's also true in every art form. Like it's definitely true in poetry and probably true in music in some way. Like that every creative process, there's some way of talking about when you're, in the flow or in the zone or not,
Right.
when you're in egolessness or not. And it doesn't mean that you stop thinking,
Mhm.
but it does for me mean I'm in some field of openness. I keep trying to find another way to talk about it.
Bonnie, I see your hand.
So,
Thank you, Margaret. That's very useful.
Thank
I'm
you,
going to come
Margaret.
back at egolessness as a word, but Bonnie, your hand was up.
Um, to me, conceptuality just becomes more and more subtle.
Mhm.
So, I mean, the words seem to be very kind of a solid, but our visualization and how we work with this is conceptual and how we regard that. So it just becomes more and more subtle. And I mean, Mahamudra is considered to be a path of conceptualization, whereas Dzogchen is considered to be a path of non-conceptualization. So to me, there's just this continuum of our gradually
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
becoming less and less
Yeah.
soft. I
Yeah.
mean, so that's how I think of it.
Well, this is where I think, what Margaret was saying, and Bonnie, thank you. What you said, like our vocabulary becomes challenging. Um, I might say back to what you said, like our practices involve mental energy. We're imagining or visualizing, but how we regard that, like, is that a concept or is that a mental image? And the word for ego that Margaret was like, I'm sure the Tibetan word that's for ego is dakme, D-A-K, and then M-E, which means less or without in Tibetan, the opposite, anti, right? And dak, D-A-K, is a short form of dak zin. So dak is me or self in Tibetan, and zin is to hold, to cherish. So self-cherishing. And what gets translated as ego in English is also translated as negative self clinging or negative self cherishing. So it's interesting if that's what's being translated as conceptual. Grant your blessing so that my mind is free from negative self clinging, like that would, and then that the self clinging is clinging onto the thought of separateness, right? So back to the flow but we are using mental energy. That's our gas pedal, right? Robert, did your hand flick up there? Do you want to jump in and then we'll come back to our discussion of the practice?
Very quick, and what I may say might just take us off
Okay.
this very, uh,
This is a very useful discussion. The view is
yeah.
critical to get, right?
So I'm wondering whether that the activity of conceptualizing, which is what you were describing at the end, Jeff, and taking into context what everybody else said, it's everything. It seems like conceptualizing is, or this is a question, is it not similar from experiencing, just being?
Well, I think we need to be more subtle with the word than just use concept or conceptualizing to cover all the bases. So if you mean having an idea and clinging to that as if it, was carved in stone and came down from Sinai, these are my ideas, right? Um, whether that's the Dharma or a political opinion or a grudge or a falling in love, like, right? That's that's one thing. And having a mental experience, like a perception, like right now we're looking at each other, mediated by this computer screen. I recognize you. That's a concept because I'm taking these electrons, interpreting them as an image, giving that image a name. All of that is like levels of what's called conceptuality. But we have one word in English to cover that perceptual process and then evaluation. And so I think we have to be a little bit more subtle in our language. And then that whole process of taking it in, This is where the Vajrayana builds on the foundation teachings and the great way teachings. Like we have an appreciation of the mechanics of perception, form, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness, the five skandhas and the ayatanas and the dhatus and not to go down the whole list, but like we sort of know, okay, this is how we experience the flow and construct a reality out of it and construct a me and a world. So far we're in the Hinayana, and now I get I'm not solid. That's just a construct or a concept, right? Hinayana, and the world itself is wide open expression of the flow, Mahayana, right? And it all evokes compassion and has the possibility of awakening. Now we're at the doorway to the Vajrayana, right? So, and if one word covers that, like because English doesn't have the wealth of words for, or common English doesn't have the wealth of words. And if you try to do that, what we're doing in a talk, most people's eyes, like in a Dharma talk that the teacher's teaching, and he's going to use mentalizing and mentating and imagining and blah, blah, blah. Most people are like lost, and they either leave or they check out somehow. So we just use one word for it. Anyway,
Great.
anybody want last words before we carry on?
I just want to say thank you very much. I hope I didn't distract from this, but this is incredibly important to me and has been for many years. So thank you, really.
No, thank you. It was a very useful question because I'm going to introduce a visualization practice. And I know everybody here has done visualization practice, but I'd like to make a remark or two and then introduce this practice as something that's related to what we're headed towards in Phowa, right? So last time I talked about how, I think I talked about this. I regard the Vajrayana as 100% metaphor and 100% literal at the same time. And that's my way of talking about appearance and emptiness, or kunzup and dundum. The way reality shows up, is all it shows up as some things, as some appearances, right? And yet it's expressing the wide open, empty, full possibility, the shunyata possibilities of phenomena. Because that's how reality is, the skillful means of the Vajrayana is, well, we can use that even though it's just an appearance. The true nature is this wide open possibility, this shunyata, that seems to be bright with possibilities. So emptiness, luminosity, right? This is how it's translated, right? But I just like open, empty, full. To me, it's better English, right? So we use that in order to we use an appearance or a thought or an image or an imagination, all the same thing. We're going to use, so I'm going to stick with imagination. We're going to use our imagination to connect with a possibility that's very awake. Because awake always shows up expressed as something. I mean, it could show up expressed as a coffee mug, but that's not a great visualization. So we're going to do something else, right? And that's the skillful means of the Vajrayana. So, and this has worked for a couple thousand years, and it's worked in both Mahamudra and Dzogchen, which uses this, ability of the mind to hold an image or to connect with a imagined experience, right? Any of the senses, right? And use that to wake up. So that's fundamentally what so-called visualization practice is. I love that, when I found this in Dan Brown's work, that the word for visualization in Tibetan basically means to imagine. It's mikpa, M-I-K, which is the word for eye, which is why it gets translated as visual, and then pa makes it a noun, right? But the mik is actually, what do they call this in poetry? It's a metonymy. So it's a metonymic expression. It's using one sense to stand in for all the senses, right? So anything is like an eye thing, an ear thing, a smell thing, a touch thing, a taste thing, or a thinking thing, which is the sixth sense, right? So using those as uh, imagined or constructed, the other Tibetan word for this practice is, the generated, Krim, the made up, or is that Sanskrit? I think it's Tibetan, the made up experience, right? So we're making it up. The made up quality is really helpful because if you're making it up, you know it's not a solid permanent thing, which is one of the hardest parts of shunyata to get hold of when we're looking at coffee cup or this body, right? This is also a made up thing. But if I'm imagining myself in the practice that I'm going to introduce, I'm imagining myself as the awakened being Avalokiteshvara, right? And I have a body made out of light. And I think everybody here has anybody not seen the movie Star Wars? You never saw Star Wars? Robert, your homework after this is to Google Princess Leia hologram, because there is a scene at the beginning of the
I've
movie.
seen the hologram.
You've seen the hologram. That's all you needed to see. The
Yeah.
rest of the movie you can ignore for this moment, right? Where there's the little body of light appears on top of the robot, R2D2, and is going, help me, Obi-Wan, help me. I'm trapped in this world and I need your help, right? And Luke, our hero, passes his hand through the projected image of Princess Leia, right? As if, is she there, right? And he passes, well, no, it's a hologram, Luke. Like, wake up. Wake up, Luke. Well, the visualization is like it's a projected image, right? So because of that, you can't hold on to it. You can free yourself from the clinging of Dak Zin. Like yes, I'm Avalokiteshvara, but I can't hold. It's not something I own. It's not a thing to be owned. It's an experience to rest in. It's very vivid, and I can hold my attention there, but I don't own it. Right? It's beyond being ownable, right? And you can imagine the experience of, like, you can imagine any experience, and you can imagine this experience as expressive of many of the great good qualities of being awake. I mean, you could imagine yourself as a flying unicorn, or you could imagine yourself as, Genghis Khan conquering the world. Like, they're probably not going to take you to being awake. But Avalokiteshvara, maybe, because that image um, brings forward or expresses the qualities of awake. Said a lot of times in Meditation is Freedom that there's an intimate connection between the body and the mind. And if you put your body in a particular pose, your mind is inclined to follow. Well, the same is true for the imagined body. Or Sambhogakaya, if you'll allow me to use that phrase, the energy body or energy expression, if you put your imagination into the posture of awake, your understanding is inclined to follow. If you put your imagination into the body of hate, your mind is inclined to follow. So that's why there's all this emphasis on practice this imagination, and then let it go, and then you make it up again, and then you let it go, and then you keep training your mind to flow in the direction of awake. So it's very helpful to know, it's like why we start with the view. The mind is very vivid, the experience of awareness, what I'm calling mind. So the experience of awareness is very vivid, It's not a thing, yet it can be shaped. And if we shape it with our imagination into the expression of awake, our mind is inclined to follow. That's the sort of why and how of visualization practice. I'm going to pause. Thoughts, questions, arguments? I love arguments. I think often when visualization practice gets taught, especially to us, we're so used to thinking, that everything we see is real, that we try to imagine ourselves as this being. So I know many of us have we have a visualization practice, many of us have Vajrayogini, and you're trying to imagine yourself as this red goddess, and you're actually trying to like look at your hand and see the goddess. Right? That's edging towards psychotic. That's not necessarily mentally healthy, right? And I don't know that that's what they meant. If you had that experience and it arose naturally, and you went, oh, wow, that's cool, and now I'm back to just being Brian, right? That would be fine. But to actually like want to see yourself as this translucent body of light as not you, I think that might not be in the direction of awake. So this is where it's sometimes like, I think a Tibetan would get that without having this have it said. But I think sometimes we think, oh, I'm supposed to see myself as the goddess or the god or the Buddha or and not get we are putting our minds into this imagined shape in order to allow awareness to flow there. Bonnie.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it reminds me of the instruction um, given that when we're doing our visualization, we're not putting ourselves in the pose of, we're not holding the flower,
Right.
but it's all in our mind. So we're imagining we're doing it. We're not really. So thanks for that. That's
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hey, and some people who might be kinesthetic learners, maybe it would help to stand in the pose. So that's okay, as long as you realize that you are shaping your awareness, or like you're imagining into this shape. Yeah. Margaret.
Well, the this is maybe a rabbit hole, but the kinesthetic awareness piece is actually part of the instruction that we were given for Vajrayogini, and you and I, and it's also really essential to all the Lama dances.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like when you're dancing as Chakrasambar or Vajrayogini or wearing one of the masks, you are attempting to embody.
Right.
So it's a continuum, I think.
Right.
It's not,
There's a conversation to be had here between.
yeah, and where for me anywhere way, I'm like Jeff, I keep coming back to this question of body mind, like because the conditioning to separate them is
Right.
um, so deep. Um, so the word imagine is an interesting choice of words that Dan picked,
Yeah.
because you can imagine with your body as much as you can with your thoughts.
Right.
I'll just stop there.
Right. Robert.
Mm. Grant said something to me at some point, how hard it was for him to be sitting in meditation and imagining him standing as Vajrayogini. And I actually thought about it. Every time after that, I would, sort of imagine myself like I'd get all sucked up, basically. I can't do that. But I keep, this is going.
Well, let me just jump in. Let me just jump in. You're sitting right now. Could you imagine yourself walking?
Absolutely. And I can imagine myself as Vajrayogini too.
Right.
I want to add one thing, and it goes back to what Margaret was saying. And this is the biggest piece that I've gotten from meditation is freedom. And that's the mind-body connection through posture.
Mhm.
And then there was one thing, and I don't know if you remember this, Jeff, in that course that we did with Carol Klein, um, Anne Klein, sorry. She was talking about the premonition is the word that she used, but you would physically feel a thought coming.
Mm.
And and so this sort of all comes together in that when the body and mind are aligned, and that's what for me posture is, that's when imagining is more possible. Is more conducive to visualization.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. I'm just going to leave that there. That was rich with possibilities to go back and forth with, but I'm going to leave it there because I want to. We've got about 20 minutes left, or maybe 30, and I'd like to move forward. Um, Anybody else have a question or a thought? Okay. So I think it's, when I was looking at Phowa practices and what's available online, there's a lot that's available online. And some of them soft sell this. They well, you can imagine anything, and that's while that is true, this practice comes out of an Indo-Tibetan culture, and they have several images that they work with that are sort of the standard set. Um, and very common to them is the Buddha of compassion, Amitabha. So without getting too lost in the all the different Buddhas, we have the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni, um, Siddhartha Gautama, who becomes the lion prince of the Shakyas, or Shakyamuni, right, prince of the Shakyas, or jewel of the Shakyas, depending on how you translate the term. And then there are five Buddhas, right? There's the Buddha of compassion, or the Buddha of action, or the Buddha of intelligence, and the Buddha of compassion is, and they all have different colors, right? So there's the Buddha of action's green, that's Amoga City, and the Buddha of intelligence is either blue or white, depending on the system that you're in, and that's Akshobhya, and then the Buddha of compassion. I'm not going to do all five. I always get them confused anyway. The Buddha of compassion is Amitabha. And Amitabha is envisioned, and I'm going to see if I can do a share here, as red. Pull this up, this image. Here we go. So hopefully you're seeing Amitabha on your screen. Right? Red. Um, it's a little bit blurry because I borrowed this image from online. He's dressed in the robes of a Buddha and the robes of a monk. So this is supposed to be the patchwork outer robe, and he's got the other two robes on underneath. And because he's a Buddha and he's a cosmic being, this is actually almost like a Gustav Klimt version of a poor man's cloak. It's very glowing and gold and patchy, right? Um, but that's his Dharma robe. He's red. He's holding his hands in this meditation posture, which is sometimes called the posture of equipoise or equal placement. So that's his hands, in his lap like this. It'll say he's seated cross-legged in the practice. Generally, in terms of Buddhas, that indicates the lotus posture. So here he's in the lotus posture. This red indicates the glowing, transformed power of passion into compassion, right? There's lots of things about this as an image. I just wanted to share the image so when we get to it, you have some kind of a visual, and I'll send these along, right? Um, um, this this bowl, depending on who you're talking to, it'll be filled with either Amrita or the elixir of immortality, or sometimes it'll have the wish fulfilling gem in it, right? But this elixir of immortality is actually the recognition of the awake nature. If you recognize the view that we talked about at the very beginning of luminosity, emptiness, open, empty, full, awake shows up expressing itself in everything that you see, which is vivid but not something that you can hold on to. That's the experience of being awake. That is the elixir of immortality. And there's a whole long discussion of that, but basically it's the essence of enlightenment is what's in the bowl, right? So I'm just going to pause. There's another image I want to share that'll be useful before we do the actual reading of the practice. Anybody want to ask anything about this image? Okay, so I'm going to stop that share, go to another one, see if I can find this one. And then next to the Buddha of compassion and some part of the sadhana, you visualize yourself as this image. So are you seeing the white Buddha now? Avalokiteshvara. Okay, and I've lost it on my screen, so see if I can find it. There it is. So again, you know, this is a very, oh, it's sort of a mix of Indian and Tibetan, this art. He has four arms. Um, this Buddha is, you know, the image of the Buddha, this kind of awake energy could be feminine or masculine. So in this image, it's masculine, but this is the same Buddha as Kuan Yin and Tara. But in China, this image is done as a woman, as a female embodiment rather than a. I mean, they do have this, but it's more culturally common as Kuan Yin. And in Japan, it's often Kanon, which is the Japanese version of Kuan Yin. So I just wanted to say that we're going to be looking at males, but it's not about gender. It's just an art form, right? So again, seated cross-legged, right? This gesture of the cross-leggedness more or less indicates that you don't move away from the quality of mind that's being expressed, right? Holding in has four arms, so four hands, hence four arms. One, two, three, four. And the practice that we have, it has this sort of awkward thing in English about the inner palms. So that's these two, the inside arms, right? And those inside arms are holding something called a wish fulfilling jewel. What the jewel grants is enlightenment, which is what everybody would wish for if they knew what they knew to if they knew what to ask for. It's like if that old thing of the genie says you can have three wishes, and you know your first wish should be I'd like to have four more. Like I'd like to have an infinite number of wishes, so I can wish for everything, right? Well, the appreciation of awake mind, open, empty, full. That's if you understand that, everything else opens up inside of Vajrayana. So the essence of the wish fulfilling jewel is awake mind. So the red Buddha is holding that in a begging bowl. This Buddha is holding it between the palms of its hands as a jewel. And then it's holding a mala, so a small rosary in one hand. And this flower, sometimes it's a lotus, sometimes it's an Utpala flower. It expresses the delicate beauty of enlightenment. Um, Rarely blooming if it's an Utpala flower. I think they bloom once every 100 years. And an incredibly delicate scent, so I am told. So, anybody want to ask anything about? And this one is dressed in sort of princely robes rather than as a monk. Okay, so I'm going to stop that. And there's another Buddha, and I didn't find a decent. Let me see if I have one to share that gets talked about. No. It was the Buddha Vajrapani. And Vajrapani is an expression of the Buddha of action, of, um, oh no, I'm forgetting that Buddha's name. Um, and Vajrapani expresses the power of the Buddha to set you free. And so often that image is blue, somewhat fierce, and holding a vajra in one hand, sometimes a bell in the other, and often looks like you know it's a semi-wrathful, so it looks sort of like a monster with fangs, right, and flames, right, um, because it's going to set you free from anything that holds you back. It's also, interestingly, the Buddha that mythically sets beings free from hell. So if you go into a Pure Land temple, and they'll have three big Buddhas in front, they have uh, Amitabha in the middle, often, and Avalok, so is the Buddha of completely, you know, enlightened, awake, kindness. And then you have the Buddha of compassion to help you in this life, Avalokiteshvara, and the Buddha of action, Vajrapani, on the other side, to save you after you're dead. And so Vajrapani is associated with this practice, in addition to being an expression of compassion, because setting you free is the most compassionate thing that any being could do. Right? But Vajrapani also helps liberate you after death, so you don't get stuck in negative self-clinging. So I'm going to pause for breath. Okay. So I'm going to read this, see if I can pull it up here. I have it on my screen. And then I will send this along. This is a practice from Mingyur Rinpoche, and it's a very short form of the sadhana for Amitabha's Pure Land of Great Bliss. And it's like a page and a half long, and literally would take less than 5 minutes to do this practice. So when we get to doing Phowa practice, it's the kind of thing that you might do, and how I would suggest ultimately doing Phowa practice is you do the Amitabha practice, and then once you've done the mantra recitation, you add in the Phowa practice. And there's a reason to do that, right? The reason you would do it that way is you're trying to set yourself free. You're trying to set your consciousness free as you die, and send it to complete awakening, or send it to the Buddhist version of heaven called a Pure Land. So some next stop along the train of consciousness, right? Where you will completely awaken. That's the basically the purpose of a Pure Land. And the thing that will hold you back from being able to send your consciousness to complete awakening, or to a place where that can happen, is holding on to yourself. And so what better way to begin than to begin by letting go of your ordinary sense of self and imagining yourself into the shape of complete compassion. So I'm going to say that again. The thing that would hold you back from complete awakening is holding on to you. I died. Where's my body? This is so terrible. Right? Etc. Right? They call this a funeral? Not enough people came. What kind of flowers are those? Right? And you're stuck in resentment, right? Like that. Whatever, you know? And so the practice is let go of holding on to Brian or to you, right? Imagine yourself as this complete expression of awake, and then leave from there. You're already on the right train to go to complete awakening. So that's why this is traditionally done this way. If you go online, you'll see people go, oh, you can imagine yourself as anything, you know. And I sort of go, yeah, and maybe they're not all equally helpful. So since I'm a Buddhist and I have this through the Kagyu lineage, I'm going to do a Kagyu practice here. You can do what you want, but here's my suggestion that you do this. So without further ado, here's the Amitabha practice. So I'm going to suggest you sort of, put yourself in a good posture. This will take about 2 minutes to read. It's not very long, right? Let it just wash over you. I'm going to be sending this to you in two forms, the form that I got it from online, and then the form that I put it in just a simple one-page Word document. Right? I was channeling you, Robert. I lightly edited for better English, but I only changed 2 words, right? And both of them were prepositions. So here we go. Amitabha's Pure Land of Great Bliss, a Brief Sadhana. Amitabha's Pure Land of Great Bliss, a Brief Sadhana of Refuge, Awakening, and Awakening Mind. To the sources of refuge, the 3 jewels and the 3 roots, I go for refuge. So that all beings may be established as Buddhas, I give rise to the Supreme Awakening Mind. Visualization. In a flower atop a lotus rising from the water, I am the white bodhisattva. Before me on a lotus and moon seat is the protector Amitabha, red in color, with 1 face and 2 arms, in meditation posture. He holds an alms bowl. He wears dharma robes and is seated cross-legged. To his right is Lokeshvara, white in color, with a single face and 4 hands, the palms of the inner ones pressing together at his heart, holding a mala in his right hand and a lotus in his left. He stands on a lotus and moon. To his left is Vajrapani, attainer of great power, blue in color, with a single face and 2 arms. In his right hand he holds a vajra, in his left a bell. He stands on a lotus and moon. They are surrounded by innumerable Buddhas. To the wondrous one, Buddha of boundless light, to the one whose compassion is great, and the one who attained great power, to all the innumerable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, I make supplication with an attitude of single-pointed devotion. I entreat you, please bestow upon me the supreme accomplishment. Empower me with your blessings that I may accomplish awakening as limitless light. Om Ami Dewa Hri, Om Ami Dewa Hri, Om Ami Dewa Hri. Recite this mantra many times. Then recite Hri repeatedly. Hri, Hri, Hri. Absorption and completion. The blessed Amitabha in front of me dissolves into light, which dissolves into me. My own body becomes like a rainbow in the sky, appearing in the form of the blessed Buddha Amitabha, an appearance in which luminosity and emptiness are unified. Dewachan prayer, aspiration to take rebirth in Sukhavati. Wondrous one, Amitabha Buddha of boundless light, with the Lord of great compassion, Mahakarunika Avalokiteshvara on your right, and Vajrapani, the Bodhisattva who attained great power, on your left, you are surrounded by a retinue of innumerable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. In your realm of comfort, happiness, and boundless amazements, the realm known as blissful, Sukhavati, may I, as soon as I have passed from this life without interruption by another rebirth, be born there. And once born there, may I see the face of Amitabha. Thus have I made in these words this aspirational prayer. I entreat all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions for the blessings that will empower me to achieve these aspirations without hindrances. Further aspirations and dedication. In all places and at all times, victorious Buddhas and your Bodhisattva children, think of me. I rejoice in an admiration of your completion of the 2 accumulations. With the virtue I have already gathered, am gathering now, and will gather in the future, I present offerings to the 3 jewels. May the teachings of the victorious Buddha spread, the fruits of virtuous actions I dedicate to all sentient beings. May all wandering beings attain awakening as Buddhas. May virtuous roots be brought together, and may they ripen in the mind's continuation. May we purify the two obscurations and complete the accumulations. May long life, health, and experience and realization increase. May we ascend the 10 bodhisattva levels in this lifetime. As soon as we pass from this life, may we be born in Sukhavati. Having been born there, may the lotus bloom. May we awaken as Buddhas in those bodies. Having attained enlightenment, may we guide wandering beings. So that's the lung. I'll say one thing here, which is, there's all kinds of things that are buried in here. There's this line, as soon as we pass from this life, may we be born in Sukhavati. Having been born there, may the lotus bloom. And the idea, hold on a second, hit save, is that if you're successful and your consciousness goes to Sukhavati, you, like Padmasambhava appearing on the white lotus in the lake of Dhanakosha, your consciousness takes birth in the blossom of a lotus. And that lotus will open. It doesn't say how long it'll take. And so one Lama said, oh, it could open right away, or it could take 10 million years. But when it opens, you'll be ready to wake up. Hence the line, may that lotus bloom. I don't want to be stuck in no flower. I'm going there to wake up. May the lotus bloom. Right? That's where that comes from. All kinds of, this is where I say it's 100% metaphoric and 100% literal. They're saying something to you in religious imagery. I don't think we're actually talking about lotuses. But we are talking about waking up completely. So having said that, I think that sets us up for our next discussion. I have one more thing to add here, but I'm going to pause to see if anybody has anything you'd like to ask about either the practice that you just heard or what we've been talking about so far. Bonnie, let me go
Go ahead.
Bonnie and then Robert. Bonnie.
So does this mean that during our Phowa practice that we are imagining ourselves as Amitabha?
I think that's it. Yeah, it's either. I had to look at it. I think it's. No, I think let me go back and look at the practice again.
So the Phowa practice is not the one that I received in 3-year retreat.
No, it's slightly different. So there are lots of them. There's a video I'm going to send of Zazep Toku talking about it, and he mentions, there's a Vajrayana Phowa, a Chakrasamvara Phowa. There's this one based on Amitabha. They all do the same thing. There's a Lama Tsongkhapa Phowa. There's all of them. There's bunches of them, right? And you're all going to visualize yourself as something. Not everybody here has Vajrayana, or not everybody who's in this group will have Vajrayana. If you want to do the one from Vajrayana, please. Right? But I thought we could talk about this shared one, and it was simple enough that we could all do it together if we wanted.
Okay.
Is that okay, Bonnie, or do you want to say more?
Yeah, so I have a lot of questions, but perhaps this isn't the right time to ask them. So,
well, it's okay. Why don't you try? We'll see what.
And so,
let me just pause. In this one, before you only become Amitabha after the Sanpanakrama, the dissolving and then re-arising, right? So you're doing this, you're Avalokiteshvara and Amitabha is the front visualization in this practice. So you're doing it as Avalokiteshvara. You asked, am I doing it as Amitabha? And they're sort of related, like the sun and sunshine, but it's a slight difference.
okay, I wasn't listening well then.
It took me 2 or 3 times reading it, and studying it to go, okay, I see how they're doing it. Right.
And so in the practice that I learned, we always did a long life practice afterwards.
Right.
Um,
I think I'm going
so,
to add that in the next time. Right?
okay,
And that's Amityas, who's also related to Amitabha.
right.
Right? Let me just, as a pause here, the reason we did that is you wind up when you do Phowa opening up the central channel, which is how the that's the road that your consciousness leaves on, right? And if you leave that open, you can shorten your life. So it's very traditional in Tibetan practices to seal that, to close the door, right? And so you use the Amityas practice to close the door. Margaret and I received this practice. We went to hear Trungpa Rinpoche teach once. I tried to tell this as a very short story. There were like 400 or 500 people there, and the lady sitting next to me, Margaret on one side, this other lady on my left, right? And I'm chatting, and it's like that's the first thing she ever went to. Was her first Dharma talk ever, and she got it, right? So I was like, okay, you can do this with anybody. And so there was this young guy, so 400 people. I'm going to say young guy. I would have been 40. He was probably 25. And at some point in the practice, this was like a weekend, we went up and Rinpoche was inspecting our heads to see did we have the sign of the Brahmarandra opening. And he was, oh yes, good. And then this guy goes up, and we're in front of his throne, bowed down in front of him, and he's like digging through people's hair to look, right? And he looked at this guy and he goes, "What are you doing?"
In English.
You hardly ever saw Trungpa Rinpoche get upset. What are you doing? And he goes, "Well, I have Amityas floating above me." That's not what I said. Do it the way I said. You could die. Next. It was really fun, right? And this poor kid sat down. It's like, was he angry at me? It's like, no. If he was angry, he would have just let you keep doing it. He wants you to live, dummy.
So the young man was not practicing the seal.
He wasn't
He
sealing.
wasn't closing.
He wasn't closing the gate. The instruction was to have Amitabha put visualize his feet on top of the opening to seal the opening. And he had them floating above because that felt cooler. Do it the way I told you. Anyway, Bonnie, it has nothing to do with your question. It was just a story. Do you have another question you want to ask, or?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
Do you want just to familiarize ourselves with this, or do you want us to practice it before the next meeting?
I think I would like you to familiarize yourself. Well, it would be great if you could practice it. So I'm gonna bring it up as a share. See if I can find it here.
And as
Like,
part of that question, how long would you do the mantra?
oh, one mala or
And what
shorter.
about for the free too?
Um, um, so let me say this. I would do the Om when we get there. I would do the first mantra, let's say 21 times, and do the short one for at least a half a mala, 50 times, 54, right? Half a mala, right? Um, it shouldn't take that long. So, are you seeing this on your screen?
I'm seeing it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'll try to put this in there. Maybe I can do it while we talk, right? Because I didn't edit this, right? So we're going to make this in red, right? To the sources of refuge, the 3 jewels and 3 roots, I go for refuge. Do that 3 times. So that all beings may be established as Buddhas, I give rise to the supreme awakening mind. I love it that they did this as a gerund. That wasn't me. 3 times, right? And then visualization. So this description of the visualization: in a flower atop a lotus rising from the water, I am the white bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. So Uh, Now I'm gonna, that's the picture I showed you of the white with the four arms, right? Before me, so in front of you, on a lotus and moon seat, is the red Buddha Amitabha. So you're visualizing yourself as Avalokiteshvara, and in front of you is Amitabha, right? Amitabha has one face and two arms. He sits in the meditation posture. So this is a description of the visualization. He holds an alms bowl. He wears Dharma robes and is seated cross-legged. To his right, so he's got his pips, his backup band, right? Lokeshvara is a short form of Avalokiteshvara, right? So, um, And Lokeshvara, basically, and we did this in 3-year retreat as Gyawa Gyamtso or Red Chenrezig, right? Um, Lokeshvara means the one who sees. So he can see all of the suffering of the world, right? Um, Kuan Yin is the one who hears. So it's the same Buddha in Chinese, except it's a different sense. She hears the cries of the world, right? He sees the tears of the world, right? So to his right is Lokeshvara, white in color with a single face and four hands, the palms of the inner ones pressed together at his heart. So it's the same visualization, holding a mala, but he's standing, right? So you're visualizing yourself as, I would visualize myself as this, the being Lokeshvara on the lotus with in the lotus posture. In front of me is Amitabha. To one side is Lokeshvara, who's white with the four arms. To his left is Vajrapani, who's blue, right, with single face and two arms, holding the Vajra and the bell. And they are surrounded by any number of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, protectors, the lineage of masters, whoever you want to have surrounding them as the expression of awake, powerful energy. Right. So that whole paragraph is the description of the visualization. And then this next paragraph, it didn't say it in the document I had, but it's not unusual to have it be words of praise. So you've invited them. Now you say nice things to them, right? Before you ask them a favor, right? To you, the wondrous one, Buddha, these next three are all epithets or titles for Amitabha. Buddha of boundless light. That's what Amitabha means, boundless light. The one whose compassion is great. The one who attained great power. So you could think the one whose compassion is great, that's the Avalokiteshvara to your own side. The one who attained great power, that's Vajrapani. So you're saying to these three people, right, or these three visualized Buddhas, to the Buddha of boundless light, the one whose compassion is great, the one who attained great power, to all the innumerable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, I make supplication with an attitude of single-pointed devotion. I entreat you, please bestow upon me the supreme accomplishment, that's the recognition of awake mind. Empower me with your blessing, and may I accomplish, and then they, in parentheses, this wasn't in the Tibetan, but they added it in, may I accomplish awakening as limitless light. And then you recite his mantra. Mingyur Rinpoche says you can do this one, which is the Tibetan version, Om Ami Dewa Hri. Om is like awake, or it's sort of like Alleluia in Tibetan. I mean, it means something, but it's also just generically like awake. Ami is a short version of Amitabha. Dewa means great, means joy, great joy, or means joy, right? And then Hri is the seed syllable for this Buddha, right? He also said you could do Om Amitabha Hri. So you can do either one, Om Ami Dewa Hri or Om Amitabha Hri. Recite that as many times. So Robert, I'm just going to say, put in here, where are we? Put this in red. 21 times or more. It's up to you. And then recite Hri repeatedly. So 1/2 mala. That's 54 times 54 or more. It's up to you how much time you want to spend. You don't have to stop at 21, right? And I just made that number up. Usually they'll go 7, 14, 21. Sometimes I add 11. I seem to like prime numbers. So it's up to you, right? Um, and then absorption and completion, right? So you've been Avalokiteshvara, imagining Amitabha, another Avalokiteshvara, and Vajrapani in front of you. The blessed Amitabha in front of me dissolves into light, which dissolves into me. So I know everybody else has practices that do this. Jeff, you've had practices that do this where the Buddhas dissolve into you? Okay, so just do the way that you normally do it, right? My own body becomes like a rainbow in the sky. That rainbow idea is it's very vivid, but you can't grab the rainbow. It is empty of grabbability and yet vivid, apparent, right? So my own body becomes like a rainbow in the sky, appearing as the Buddha, as the blessed, in the form of the blessed Buddha Amitabha, an appearance of which luminosity and emptiness are unified. So to make this absorption and completion, blessed dissolve, which dissolves into me, right? I would probably pause here. And you get to interpret what briefly means to you. So pause. Buddha Amitabha has dissolved into you. You've let go of any idea of being separate from Amitabha, but you're not holding on to the image. So this is pretty much a Sanpanakrama moment, a resting in openness. And then you re-arise. My own body becomes like the rainbow in the sky, appearing in the form of the blessed Buddha Amitabha, an appearance in which luminosity and emptiness are unified. And then this is the Dewa Chen prayer. Dewa means great joy. Dewa means joy, and Chen makes it great joy. And Sukhavati in Tibetan is called Dewa Chen. So it's the prayer to take rebirth in Dewa Chen or Sukhavati. And then the rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. Wondrous One, Amitabha, Buddha of boundless light, with the Lord of great compassion, the great compassionate one, which is what Mahakarunika means, Avalokiteshvara on your right, and Vajrapani, the Bodhisattva who attained great power on your left. So you are, as you're saying this, you've absorbed the energy of Amitabha, and because you're not holding on to the sense of separate self, or at least you're trying not to hold on to it, you can be Amitabha and be talking to imagined Amitabha in front of you. It's Amitabha everywhere, right? You're not holding on to Brian or you anywhere. It's like you've let that go. And so you are expressing the wish for consciousness to be reborn. So you're expressing that to Amitabha and Avalokiteshvara and Vajrapani, right? As soon as I have died, may I be born in the realm known as blissful Sukhavati. As soon as I have passed from this life without the interruption of another rebirth, may I be born there. And once born there, may I see the face of Amitabha. Well, I'm talking to Amitabha. Yes, and you want to continue to see the face of Amitabha. Thus I have made these words as aspirational prayer. I entreat all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions to empower me to achieve that without hindrance. And then further aspiration and dedication, right? In all places and at all times, like whenever I have done, right? May the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and all those Buddhas help me do that, right? The completion of the 2 accumulations, they have cut through, it's the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom are the 2 accumulations. The accumulation of merit is gathering enough positive energy to get you past self-clinging. And wisdom is knowing what's there when you let go, which is that open, awake space of enlightenment. With the virtue, that's the merit, I have already gathered, I'm gathering now, and will gather in the future. I present offerings, right? May the teaching spread. May the fruits of all virtuous actions help other beings. May any beings wandering, awaken as Buddha, right? And so you continue to make that prayer so that eventually, when you die, your consciousness goes to awakening. It either goes to full awakening immediately or it takes rebirth in Sukhavati / Dewa Chen, where you will then see the face of compassion, Amitabha, and achieve awakening. And then the goal, if you've taken the Bodhisattva vow, which I know everybody on this call has, is not to stay in Dewa Chen like you've stayed forever in holiday in Hawaii or somewhere pleasant. You come back to help the world because we've made the vow that as long as there are sentient beings, we will return to be helpful. Somewhere. We will come back somewhere and be helpful in some capacity. So I'm going to pause. Anybody want to ask anything about the text or about the practice?
It sounds like a beautiful practice. I mean,
Yeah.
I look forward to practicing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think anybody on this call can probably accomplish that practice in less than 10 minutes. Maybe 5. I mean, it's a short chant. It's not a long chant, right? And we're building the energy to do the Phowa with. So the next time we gather, I think I won't do it today, but I'll go back to talking about the subtle body. The last time we talked about the inner channels and the chakras, right? So, you have a sense that you are, just very briefly, you are Avalokiteshvara doing the practice. And in the background, you know that there are these subtle energies in the body. So when we get to the Phowa part of the practice, we will bring that awareness to the foreground. Right? So I'll leave it there for today. Right?
So can you send that to us in a Word file so
Yeah.
that I can format it however I choose?
Yep. And I have 2 versions. I have the version that I downloaded from I think it's from Changpa Rinpoche's bookstore. It was free, so I think it's okay to share it. And that has the Tibetan and English and a nice picture of Amitabha and whatever. And then I'll forward the document that I just was reading from, which is me abstracting from that. So I was just looking at the English and not the Tibetan. And then I also will add the images of Amitabha and Avalokiteshvara. But you can find lots of them online. Find one that you like, that works for you. Anyone else? Thoughts?
I have to call Brian.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Let's dedicate the merit. So by this merit,
May all obtain
obtain
emissions.
admissions.
May to keep the enemy
The
from
enemy
doing.
wrongdoing
From
from
the
the
From the
stormy
stormy
wave,
wave of birth, old age, illness, and death,
sickness, and
the
death,
social of
and the
samsara.
ocean of samsara.
May I
all
free all
beings.
beings.
Okay. Just very
Thanks,
quick.
everybody.
Can everybody make it next Tuesday?
Thanks for accommodating my schedule, you guys. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And is this going to be the always time?
I think so. I
Okay.
talked with Cynthia and I've talked with Cynthia. So she'll join us every other Tuesday, I think.
Oh, great.
She
As
has
long
a
as you can be here sometimes.
Yeah, I
awake.
appreciate
Okay.
the early morning. Yeah, I think I'm most awake early in the morning.
Too.
Me too.
Lovely.
All right,
Thank you
friends.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Hang on a sec. I don't, this is addressed to whoever knows about this. Are you attending the Zoom ceremony of Grant
Yes.
Zoom ceremony at 4 o'clock?
Mhm.
Like, I just want to make sure I got the time right. I calculated that it would be his 10:15 tomorrow morning is my 4:15 in the afternoon, assuming that's 5:15 for you.
Correct.
It's 1:15 for me.
Correct.
Okay, we're good to go. All right, thank you.
It's
That makes me feel better.
5:45 in Newfoundland. I always do this goofy Canada thing. It's half an hour off the time zone. All right, friends.
Okay.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you at the wedding.
Yeah. Yes.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.